Hello friends, welcome to another week's Q&As, joined by my lovely and helpful wife Lucie.
Hi guys.
Lucie will be asking me one of your questions from Instagram. Before we start, I just want you guys to know if you have any questions, be sure to write in the comments below and I will answer you publicly. That way other people can learn as well. I'm trying to avoid DM questions on Instagram so other people can learn also. Thank you.
Alright, so the question's by Jonas We1. Is there a testosterone versus longevity trade-off? People cruising on 200 milligrams and doing smaller blasts seems to do relatively fine. Possible risk longevity trade-offs in regard to TRT would be interested as well.
Thank you, Lucie. Okay, it's a very interesting question, complicated question. So I guess this discussion will mostly be about TRT, which is testosterone replacement therapy. By the way, testosterone replacement therapy is when men grow older, they tend to produce less testosterone as they age, which may be a protective thing actually. And as they produce less testosterone, they become, in an extreme case, something called hypogonadal, in which case their testes shrink and they produce much less testosterone. Doctors have been in the last few decades prescribing testosterone, which is injected intramuscularly at a very low dose. Greg Doucette will tell you he takes testosterone replacement therapy at 140 milligrams, yet he looks like a competitive bodybuilder on stage. But nonetheless, that's what it usually is, a very low dose. Some people take a higher dose, which is 250 milligrams or so. Before I talk about testosterone replacement therapy, I just want to briefly address this topic this subject that he mentioned, which is he said people that cruise and do a cruise on a testosterone replacement dose, which means they just stay at that replacement dose. Then once in a while they do this thing called blasting, which Dante Trudel, a person I'm not really much of a fan of, he described this thing called blasting, which every once in a while you increase the dose that you use, then you go back down to a lower dose and so on.
So basically cycling the dose.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a better word for it than blast and cruise, which sounds... Exactly. Now the thing about the blast is that... Now guys, if you have questions about this, I'll try to include cards somewhere here. But what you should do is go watch my videos on how androgens affect the kidneys, how they affect the liver. I have two really good videos on that subject, which I think are the best videos around on the subject. Basically, we know that high-dose androgens cause liver cancer, and we know that androgens in general cause liver disease. Now, cause kidney disease.
Okay.
Now, in the video on the kidneys, I mostly discuss the effects of androgens on the what's called glomerulosclerosis, which is the hypertrophy, the enlarging of the kidney that causes the glomeruli to enlarge and then develop this condition called glomerulosclerosis, in which they become damaged and unable to function through fibrosis and other things like that. But I didn't mention the fact that actually androgens, and I'll mention this in a different time in more detail, but androgens themselves directly cause oxidative stress, maybe also reactive nitrogen species stress at the kidneys, which cause damage to the kidneys directly. So it's not just the effect of the kidney growing larger, but also a direct effect on the kidneys.
So is that dose dependent?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So,
and is it age dependent? Meaning that, people that get, older age got TRT, are they more susceptible to those symptoms, or like the younger they start, the more chance they get to...
So I haven't read a study there is no study probably that directly studied this, but I'm completely certain that it's so. I mean, think of it this way: when you're younger, your androgens, as a man, when you're 25, you have higher. When you're 20, you have higher androgens in your body and more DHT than an older man, but you don't lose hair, because you have a better cellular integrity in the body and better responsiveness. As you get older, all of these things that are damaging, excitotoxic, damaging to cells, cause more cell death and more changes to the DNA and all kinds of things like that. You accrue these things over time.
So if a younger person does extreme dose of testosterone but they stop at a certain age, they have a chance to recover and not damage themselves?
Well, that's an interesting subject, very complicated one, but they certainly have less chance of damaging themselves than someone doing it older. Now, in terms of recovery, the thing is, when DNA is damaged in cells, all you can really do is kill the cell, hoping that it doesn't mutate, doesn't cause hyperplasia, and then you develop tumors, growths of damaged DNA cells. So you would think, so if someone stops earlier, maybe over time their cells may die, and in which case if the cells die, maybe they'll not suffer from it. But there is like generally scientists think that damage done in youth, for example, from smoking, you may not die of lung cancer when you're older, but the amount of inflammation that you encountered when you're younger still affects your telomeres, for example, for life and other things like that. Yeah, but let's get into the details of this. So what I'm trying to say is, blasting is definitely harmful. Also, sorry guys, I didn't mention, not just do I have a video on liver and a video on the kidneys, I also have a video on androgens and the brain. So all three of these will be in, see here, there are cards, you can click on it. Watch these videos so you understand the level of damage that occurs when you blast. And I'm a person who's blasted before. I'm not somebody telling you that doesn't have experience. I didn't call it blasting because I'm not a fan of this character. But the point is, I have taken large doses, and I have friends who take very large doses, professional athletes, and I know that. I warned them about it. Some people don't care, and if you don't care, that's fine. But you have to understand that every time you do that blast, you're causing damage in your body that can only be gotten rid of by cell death, which is cell apoptosis. So you're losing the integrity of your cells, and the only way to get rid of them is by cell death, which is very hard to experience if your mTOR is always on. So if you're never fasting and you're never having a lot of autophagy as well as having the AMP kinase pathway turned on, then these cells are not being killed. So in the long term, you end up with a lot of damaged cells in your body that can mutate, can grow into tumors, called tumorigenesis, by the way. If you read my articles, if you ever see the word tumorigenesis, that means the growth of tumors. So that's what can happen there. So blasts are not healthy. However, if we want to talk about, he said, is there a trade-off between testosterone and longevity? Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting subject. So basically, it's complicated to study. The reason why is this. A man's testosterone levels are essentially a statistical proxy of his health, in a way, so within one man. So across the population, men have different levels of testosterone. But within one man, when his health gets worse, his testosterone levels decrease. And so testosterone levels can be seen as a proxy for health. And
so we talk about physical health and mental health.
Yeah, potentially both. Potentially both. But I'm mainly talking about physical health. So, for example, what you see is in long-lived people, there is a statistically not significant. I mean, the difference between people who live to 70 in epidemiological studies and people who live to 90, there's a non-significant statistical difference in testosterone levels. Mm-hmm. There's also one study on veterans, I think it's veterans, that shows a higher testosterone level being statistically significantly associated with longer life. However, this is endogenous testosterone, not testosterone replacement therapy. So this is may still be picking up a signal of their actual health instead of the effect of actual testosterone.
I see.
On the other hand, testosterone replacement therapy is not correlated with extended life. In fact, there's a study that shows it's associated with increased mortality.
How come?
Now, that's a good point. So let's get into the details. So let me go into the different kinds of health parameters that we can be thinking about. Let's first talk about cardiovascular disease. So it's shown, again, by the same proxy, that people who have lower testosterone levels tend to have worse cardiovascular health. Mm-hmm. They have more risk of cardiac events. However, testosterone replacement therapy has not been shown to improve this risk in people that are hypogonadal or have low testosterone levels. In fact, I mean, forget about people who had normal testosterone levels. Okay. I'm talking about even the ones that have low testosterone levels, it's not shown. In fact, it may increase the mortality. And for you guys that don't know, the FDA has a disclaimer saying that testosterone replacement therapy has not been evaluated for its effects on cardiovascular health. And the American Association of Endocrinologists also say this, essentially the same thing, that we don't know the effect it's going to have. So again, we're picking up this proxy, and the actual replacement is not having the same effect on cardiovascular disease. Okay. Now, the one place where we know testosterone replacement therapy does improve parameters is metabolic health. And what metabolic health is, it improves, so people who have lower testosterone levels have more cases of metabolic syndrome, which is a syndrome associated with 5 independent markers. You guys can, actually one day I should do a video about metabolic syndrome because I talk about it a lot, but you can just Google and learn about it. It is a syndrome that is very common in the US, especially in men as they age. And low testosterone levels are associated with it, just like they're associated with bad cardiovascular events. Mm-hmm. However, testosterone replacement therapy does improve the effects of the metabolic syndrome. So for example, it improves blood glucose levels, it improves insulin sensitivity, it improves a few things that's related to it. I can't think of. I'm not sure about the other ones, but so it does improve metabolic. This is the only situation in which testosterone replacement therapy has been shown to improve health. The only one. And by the way, guys, if you watch my liver video, you'll see that lower doses of androgens actually allow the liver to get rid of fat on the liver. And fatty liver disease, we're now suspicious, or not we, I don't research, but researchers are suspicious that fatty liver disease plays a consequential role in the development of metabolic syndrome. In particular, it has a causal effect on it. So if you're better able to get rid of fat on the liver, you're less likely to get insulin resistant, is what we think. And androgens at low doses do that. At high doses, they cause liver cancer, right? And they cause apoptosis of cells in the liver, and they cause DNA damage on cells of the liver. But at low doses, they do that. So that's why testosterone replacement therapy may be helpful for metabolic syndrome, I think.
Okay.
Now, you may be thinking, okay, the biggest concern, actually, Prince Andrew from the Delray Misfits asked me a question. He said, is testosterone replacement therapy correlate, is it associated with problems with the prostate? And now Andrew actually in his family doesn't have a history of prostate enlargement or prostate cancer. Many people do have that in their family. I do, for example, and not in prostate cancer, but in prostate enlargement, which is called benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is the growth of the prostate that causes the urethral canal to narrow, causing men to have difficulty urinating, which is a horrible condition. They have to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes. They go very little in the bathroom. They come back out. They feel their bladder is not empty. They live like this, usually in their 50s, 60s, and so on. And how this happens is the prostate is very sensitive to androgens. It has androgen receptors on the prostate. And the more androgenic a molecule is, so for example, trenbolone is extremely androgenic, the steroid, but so is DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which is a product of testosterone, much more androgenic at the androgen receptor than testosterone, which is why finasteride, the higher dose version, which is called Proscar, not Propecia, is used to prevent the growth of the prostate, because the prostate responds to androgens. So you would think that low testosterone levels would be associated with, actually they are. Low testosterone levels are associated with less prostate cancer.
Okay.
So men, even though testosterone is a proxy, testosterone levels are a proxy for health, low testosterone levels are still associated with lower cases of prostate cancer.
Okay.
Now, this is the one that I was going to say you would think is kidney health. So in terms of kidney health, again, we know that androgens seem to be harmful for the kidney in the same way that they are for the prostate in both cases. But in the kidney, because men get kidney disease way more frequently than women, and as I described before, there are a lot of mechanisms by which androgens, both super physiological as well as physiological levels, can harm the kidneys. But interestingly, low testosterone levels are not correlated with better kidney health. You would think it would be, but for some reason it's not. And the reason is, I think, because that the lower testosterone levels are indicative of poor health within a person, not across a population, right? Because some populations, some ethnicities have lower testosterone levels, for example. Some people, some families have lower testosterone levels. But within one person, so for example, within myself, if I have never used steroids before and my testosterone suddenly drops, which does happen, by the way, as a consequence of depression. It does happen as a consequence of many health things. Or maybe it is causal in those, as you said, it could be both ways. So we've covered the cardiovascular, metabolic, prostate, kidney. I think that's really all we can discuss here. Surely certain levels of testosterone or other neuroactive steroids have been shown to be important for brain health. However, the TRT has never been studied for brain health. 5-alpha reductase, I have a blog series on my blog if you're interested. It's called How to Protect Yourself from Finasteride. It is a discussion of the impact of neuroactive steroids. Finasteride, by the way, is a 5-alpha reductase enzyme blocker. It's an inhibitor of the type 2 and 3 very effectively. What that does is prevent upstream hormones from turning into downstream hormones like dihydrotestosterone, but it has an effect on the brain because of that. But also there are other hormones in the body, such as DHEA, that have neuroprotective effects in the brain. So I wouldn't say that, and studies have shown that low doses. Now these studies are in vitro, in petri dishes.
Okay.
Studies have shown, and you can see my video about androgens in the brain, but low doses of testosterone, when an aromatase enzyme blocker is not used, which means testosterone can convert to estrogen, is not neurotoxic in the brain cells. However, once you add an aromatase inhibitor, it becomes neurotoxic.
Got it.
So, and also, this is for testosterone. However, as you see, watch the video, guys, but as you see from nandrolone is always neurotoxic. And these other derivatives, a lot of them are always neurotoxic. And nandrolone, for example, is also always neurotoxic for the kidney. I'm not going to get into that too much here now. But basically, I covered the major aspects. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. So how low it's too low in terms of testosterone, and when to consider TRT, if to consider TRT? Like, is there a middle ground? Is there anything that, when is it too high, when is it too low? If there is a middle thing, you said it depends on the person, but maybe there is like general data that can indicate.
So this is it's great that you asked that question, so I can say it clearly. There is no indication to ever replace your testosterone levels unless you have signs of the metabolic syndrome. Unless you have type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, fatty liver disease. Those are the only conditions in which research would indicate that there is a reason to replace your testosterone, even if you're hypogonadal. And by the way, if you're not hypogonadal and you replace your testosterone at those levels, the effect is not seen. It's only if you're hypogonadal, which means, so if your testosterone level, for example, is below 200, in that case, it may be helpful for your health because metabolic syndrome is extremely dangerous and is associated with so many other adverse health outcomes, including cardiovascular disease and cancer and all other kinds of things. So there is no indication otherwise, which is why I've mentioned in a previous video, someone was talking to me about TRT and saying TRT is healthy and it's anti-aging, and I said, I don't believe so. I don't take testosterone. I took testosterone for years. As you guys know, I have a video series on how to recover from testosterone, from androgens in general, from taking them exogenously. And so my point is, no, there is no indication unless you have metabolic syndrome. And if you have metabolic syndrome, the problem is not actually your testosterone. The problem is your lifestyle. So testosterone it may be like performance enhancing, may make it easier to get rid of the fat on the liver and improve your insulin resistance and all of that kind of stuff. But you could do that much easier by having a circadian eating. Fasting is extremely destructive to the metabolic syndrome. Long fasts change the insulin sensitivity dramatically, quickly. This is why I was talking to Lenny a lot about these long fasts. And changing your lifestyle can easily remove that. So basically, in my opinion, and I'm not a medical doctor and this isn't medical advice, but there's no reason ever to use testosterone replacement therapy. Unless you are, I don't know what level of hypogonadal. If you're producing almost no testosterone, you may experience serious depression, but not at the level that's 200 in the US metrics. Okay. I'm talking about 50 maybe, something like that, where it's causing you can't have sex at all, and you're younger. And in that case, the only times that really ever usually happens is people who have abused steroids, and in which case you need to recover that. And in my opinion, I would rather recover it with the use of HCG, something like that, even long term, than using testosterone. Why? Because I believe, although there's no good research for this, I believe that testosterone replacement therapy causes damage to the testes. There is evidence that, as I mentioned many times, post-mortem analysis of bodybuilders show that the bodybuilders have fibrosis in their testes, which means scarring of the testes and deposition of collagen in the testes. So I imagine that if you had to do anything, long-term HCG use would be better than taking testosterone replacement therapy. And if you're worried about your estrogen going high, estrogen is extremely protective and extremely beneficial for mood, for sex, for all kinds of things. And it won't go that high unless you take huge doses of HCG. And there's a difference of opinion between me and some other, particularly bodybuilding coaches, about long-term HCG use. Many people say that if you take HCG for a long time, it stops being as effective, and they think that your Leydig cells and your Sertoli cells in your testes can become unresponsive to the gonadotropins. I believe that research conclusively shows this is not true. In fact, there is tons of research using HCG for 5 years straight, 7 years straight, and after 7 years of continuous use, fertility is reignited and pregnancy occurs with the couples. So if it was the case that such a downregulation of the receptors at the Leydig and Sertoli cells was true, there would be no chance that after 5 years it would happen, and you would have to increase the dose so much, but the doses are not increased. They're increased. They're not. In fact, in the studies, they're increased only within a couple of months, and then they stay the same for years on end, and it still works. So I don't believe that's true at all. So there's no reason really to be too afraid of HCG, in my opinion. I used to be. I heard people say that, and many years ago, and I didn't know if this was true or not. So I stopped using HCG during my actual cycles. I was on like a really long cycle, and that was a big mistake. And so I would never do that if it was myself. I would, if I could go back, would always use HCG once a week. Again, this is a bit off topic, but important information for people to know. We don't want to spread speculation and misinformation when there is a lot of research that backs a certain opinion.
So how often do you recommend people to check their testosterone level?
I don't think people really even need to check it unless they have some kind of... I don't check mine. I haven't even checked my testosterone level since I stopped using anabolic hormones. Even though I checked my sperm function, but I didn't check my testosterone because that's not... By the way, also, sperm quality is correlated to better health outcomes. Again, another proxy, because your sperm quality indicates how healthy you are as well. But I don't recommend anyone to check it unless... And I'm not a medical doctor to recommend these things, but I wouldn't check it unless you have a suspicion that you have basically depression or a lack of sexual activity, and you're young and you think it's because of your testosterone. Otherwise, I wouldn't check it unless, of course, you've just been using hormones and you're trying to recover. In which case, watch my series. I describe how often to check it. All right. Thank you guys so much for your question. We'll see you next time.